All right, welcome back. So in this video, I want to talk about the research proposal part of the research project. So the last video was about the annotated bib, which I would suggest you complete first before you turn to the proposal. So let's dive into it. Try and keep this video from being a little bit too long. So imagine that you are introducing yourself to someone else. What sort of questions might you ask at the outset? So chances are you might say your name, occupation, major, where you live or where you're from, maybe your hobbies and interests, and some other information might come out. But again, depending on where you are in the world, there are certain things that you're going to bring up, right? But definitely here, in the West and especially in the US, it's pretty common to say your name, what you do for a living, and where you're from, or something like that. Now, again, then we might, think about in that conversation why somebody focuses on a certain hobby like gardening or what got you into it and things like that, which continues to expand that introduction. So usually we begin to investigate something by thinking about either its use, how we use it, or its history. So, if we're talking about artificial intelligence, we might even either start that in discussion, if you will, that introduction, by thinking about how it can be used if we want to focus on that part, or what the history of artificial intelligence is. So an example, I could say that apocalyptic narratives, I could provide a bunch of history for that, going back to religious scriptures and various ends of the world type things. And then I could ask, why is this? So what I want you to take away from this part is, in the introduction, usually what we're asking is, why is this important? What's kind of the history? What's the background that a reader needs to know in order to follow the rest of your investigation? So when we're approaching this, and this is kind of an analogy that I probably have used in other videos, and we'll go through it in a little bit more detail today too, with the research project and with the essays, if we're to boil it down to kind of simple questions, those questions that you could ask a 5-year-old or that a 5-year-old could ask you. Number one, what's the problem? Why is it a problem? Why it's a problem that we should focus on? Like, why is it worth our time and energy? What are people saying about the problem? And what are we going to do next? So again, if my daughters are arguing and I don't know what the argument was, I might begin by saying, what's the problem here? What's going on? Why is it a problem? Why is it a problem that we really need to deal with right now? Can it wait until later? And then I might listen to both sides of the argument and then figure out, okay, what are we going to do next from there? So again, this goes back to identifying a problem and a solution. I'll reiterate that you don't have to find a solution, like a complete fix for the problem, but you should at least suggest some course of action somewhere in your paper. Now, the example that I use is this house on fire analogy. Number one, what's the problem? The house is on fire. Okay. Why is that a problem? Well, it's all relative, right? If it's not your house, it's less of a problem, right? So if it's your house, big problem. Not your house. If it's close by, more of a problem. But if the house that's on fire is in a different country, in a different city, and it's owned by somebody you don't know, it may not be something that you care about to a great deal. It's unfortunate, but you may not care, and there may not be a whole lot you can do about it. So again, this goes back to audience awareness as well. Now, why is this a problem we should focus on if the house is on fire? Well, I really don't want my things to get burned up, and none of my neighbors want their things burned up either. Okay, great. Then, what are people saying? Well, maybe people are saying we need to put it out, we should call the fire department, or maybe people are like, you know what, forget it, just let that thing burn. Let's get some marshmallows, right? So from there, though, we still need to take that next step, which is, what are we going to do next, right? Now, I might not be capable of putting out the fire, but the fire department can. That's what they're equipped for, so they can take over from there. Think about your research much in the same way. What is the problem? Why is it a problem? Etc. Now, if we're just giving a history lesson, that's not really a research paper. Are you doing some research? Sure, but for our purposes, I want you to think about something actionable, right? And this, I think, is the better way to approach this. So let's look at another example. Let's say I want to focus on climate change. So let's say the problem is climate change or global warming, whatever we want to call it. Why is this a problem? Well, no food it will result in no food because we can't grow crops, and if we don't have food, then we don't get to keep living. Why is it something we should focus on? Well, it's getting worse, and we don't have a lot of time to fix this. What are people saying? Maybe people that agree say we should leave Earth, we should stop using fossil fuels, or we should find a way to get rid of emissions. And then what are we going to do next? Right? Again, we don't have to solve climate change, but we can make some suggestions about the things that should happen. And those suggestions should be real in scope. So, for example, to say that we should just stop using fossil fuels is a solution, but is it pragmatic? Is it actually going to happen? Not overnight anyway, right? So, again, it all depends on approach. Now, one thing that we could say here too is be aware of big pronouncements. Like, everybody knows climate change is dangerous. There are climate change deniers, so we can't necessarily make that claim. Just like making that blanket, we should just stop using fossil fuels is tricky because, again, that's not going to happen overnight. So what can we do in the meantime? All right, so in the interest of time, let's dive into this. So the connection to the actual research proposal. So you're actually going to follow pretty much that same template as you approach, as you actually do the proposal part of this. So there are 5 sections to the proposal. The first one is the introduction. What I want is a paragraph or 2 paragraphs of introduction. So what's the background? What's the context? How kind of ground your reader in the current perspectives on your topic. You can think of this like the introduction paragraph to an essay, just without a thesis. So you don't need a thesis here. And if you do this well, and it's an introduction that you really like and you want to use it for your essay, that is totally fine with me. That is not self-plagiarism. That is just simply using work you've done this quarter for one assignment that is intended to build you to the next assignment. The second part, so you could have your heading introduction, your paragraph or a couple paragraphs providing context. Then the second part, reason for further investigation. Again, why is this a problem that we need to address right now? What is it about climate change that means we need to deal with this problem right now? What's missing from the discussion? So remember, and this is probably one of the trickiest parts about that reason for further investigation. A lot of people interpret this as the problem itself, if you will. So the reason for further investigation is that climate change is real and is harming our planet. Well, really, that's more in the introduction. The reason for further investigation should be what's not really being talked about or what's missing from the conversation. So maybe we say, the problem right now with climate change, for example, is that although majority percentage-wise people believe that climate change is real and we know what to do, the real reason we need to investigate this is nobody's talking about, specific actionable things that we can do, or nobody's putting a lot of time into how we convince, people who believe it's not real to, help them get on board with this. The objectives part is one of the parts that I like a lot as far as setting you up for your essay. So the objectives are, what are your specific objectives with the essay? So as an author, think about this as your game plan. I want to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and those can be bullet pointed. The more specific you are there and the more intentional, the better you're going to be set up for your thesis. So the objectives will also lead you to a thesis. So far with just those 3 chunks, if you do it well, you've got the introduction for your paper and at least a start for your thesis. The fourth part is the literature review. So summarizing kind of your initial research, taking into account themes and trends. And then the last part is the plan. And this is also really helpful, just like the intro and objectives. But what you're doing here is just saying, here's my next step. I need information about this specific thing. Okay, right? So like I need information about how modern cars reduce carbon emissions, or I need more information about how where electric car batteries go when they're no longer used and whether or not that's toxic waste. This is for you specifically. As the author at this point in time, what are your next steps? Now, one of the places that a lot of people lose points on this is they'll just say, I need to do more research, period. That may be true, but what specific research do you need to do more of? All right, so let's jump forward here and look at this in kind of a section at a time. So again, history, right? So what's the topic? Why does it kind of need to be addressed further, like from a general standpoint? What do most people probably know about it? Is there a solution? If not, why not? And if there is a solution, why is that solution not being used? And, you know, again, this should be a fully developed paragraph, and you can stray from this. This is not prescriptive, but if you want kind of a place to start, this is how I would start, right? Giving that background, giving a little bit of that history. So again, the intro should provide the basic background. What you could do to help yourself out is pause the video and answer these questions. Define your topic. What are you talking about? Write down what you think most people already know about the topic, and then write down what an average reader will need to know to understand the topic. If you're not going into all the technical details of climate change, you don't need to include the technical details. So again, you can go with basics. So you can pause, you can go through this, and then you can continue on, and I'll show you what the example looks like. So here's the example from the example paper, the example from the example, of what the intro looks like. Here, what we look at is 2 paragraphs. Again, I wrote this isn't from a student example, so I tried to mimic kind of what an A paper would look like here. So is it perfect? No, but it covers all of the bases. And I'm not going to read it because you can pause or you can go look at that example. I already talked about the fact that you can reuse this. So let's go ahead on to the reason for further research. So that's section 2. So you would have intro. You can make that bold. Section heading 2, reason for further research. Why this topic, right? And again, it's not just simply global warming is bad, it's harmful to all of us, but why does the topic need more research? Where are there gaps? How can we fill them in? I'll give you another example. So when I have students writing about social media and the harmful effects of social media, this reason section tends to be rather weak. And the reason for that is it's fairly common knowledge that there are negative components to social media, whether that has to do with body image or bullying or addiction or whatever it is. We don't need additional research into that area because we already have that research. What other areas do we need to go into? So we could say instead, this needs more research because despite the fact we know there are all these negatives, nobody's doing anything to address how to solve the problem, right? And again, just saying quit social media is not a very good solution because that's just not going to happen. All right. I'm going to skip over a slide there. So in that reason for further investigation, you know, why is this a problem that needs to be researched? There are more and more, you know, topics, ideas, things on this out there. And then what has not been researched or investigated thoroughly. And again, remember that the reason for additional research is not simply the topic. The reason should tell us why this topic still needs to be addressed and what can be done about it. So I'm going to jump forward again here. Here's the example from the example from the example. Again, I did it again. And you can go read that on your own. Again, why is it worth our time to research this topic? And why would it be worth your reader's time to learn more about it? And I'm going to try and go a little bit faster here just to wrap this up. Objectives. Okay. You know, again, if I want to get better grades, what steps do I need to take to get there, right? Maybe that would be studying more, or making sure that I do the reading, or getting help from my instructor. And sort of once we've identified that problem or issue, right, like I want to get better grades, then we can figure out what are the specific steps. So it's all well and good to say, hey, I want to get better grades, but how do I do that? What's the first step? So to go back to our house is on fire analogy, if my main goal is to put out the fire, what are my first objectives? Well, one objective is going to be to keep myself and other people safe. Another objective is going to maybe prevent the fire from spreading. And another objective might be to protect other houses. Right. So again, I'll skip forward here. An essay is the same, right? We have a goal, but we also have sort of sub-objectives. And so again, here's kind of the breakdown of that. What do you want to accomplish? What are some specific things that you can achieve within the scope of this project? And what's the overall point of the essay, right? And remember, all writing has some sort of objective, whether that is your grocery list with the primary objective of making sure you don't forget the milk. Here's the example from the example. So you can see I've just bullet pointed it here, 1, 2, 3, with a little bit of extra explanation, and that is perfectly fine. A-type work for our purposes here. Literature review, I talked about quite a bit in the annotated bibliography video, so I won't go into as much detail here. But again, what are people saying? What do people agree on? What do people disagree on? It's always a sort of red flag to me if everybody agrees on it. If every possible source you have agrees on a course of action or something like that, there are two possibilities in my mind. One, either you haven't done enough research yet to really find out that disconfirming data, and so we're falling into confirmation bias, or it's such a well-researched topic that it's unlikely that we're going to be able to bring a whole lot new to the table. So think about something like smoking cigarettes is bad. Every source that's reputable is probably going to tell you that smoking cigarettes is bad for your health. So a whole paper about how smoking is bad for our health is probably unnecessary at this point in time. Okay, so again, I'm going to jump forward. Again, 3 basic questions. What are other people saying about the topic? What research has been done? And what might be missing? Again, there's the example from the example. And 2 last things. Kenneth Burke had this analogy of thinking of kind of a literature review as summarizing a discussion, right? You've come in late to a party, people are already talking about something, you listen for a little while until you kind of understand what's going on, what people are talking about, and then you weigh in with your point of view, and eventually you're going to leave as well. So that's Burke's analogy for how academic writing goes and how research goes. So just kind of keep that in mind. Summarizing a longer conversation is a great way to look at the literature review. All right, last bit. So the plan is the 5th section, and it does get a little bit tricky, but again, if we go back to that example of getting better grades, if the problem is I'm not getting the grades I want, the goal is to get better grade, I've got my objectives, and then the plan should be, what do I need to figure out next? So in this case, the plan would be I need to figure out how to take better notes. I've tried various methods, nothing seems to work. So my research is going to focus on methods that I haven't tried yet. And if you want to see that, the last 2 slides here, number 1, where are you going to head to from here, right? What types of research? What are you going to try and find? What are the specific next steps? And again, as specific as possible. Maybe you need to find more academic sources, or maybe you want to find some popular sources that are a little bit easier to make sense of. Maybe you want to find that disconfirming data because a lot of what you have so far is kind of falling into that confirmation bias. So whatever it is, I want to know what your specific next steps are for your research as you approach the paper. And again, here is that example from the example. And again, you can pause and read this, or you can go and look at the actual example. So there you go. This ended up being a longer video than I intended, but if you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all later.